Stop saving money. That sentence likely sent a jolt of electricity through your nervous system, triggering a defensive reflex honed by decades of well-meaning advice from grandmothers, bank tellers, and financial gurus who preach the gospel of the clipped coupon. It sounds reckless, doesn't it? It sounds like the advice of a hedonist standing on the edge of a cliff, urging you to jump without a parachute. But I want you to suspend that disbelief for just a moment. I am not suggesting you drain your 401k to buy a sports car or light your paycheck on fire for a weekend in Vegas. I am suggesting something far more radical and far more dangerous to the status quo. I am suggesting that the very act of obsession, the neurotic, white-knuckled grip you have on every single penny, is the exact mechanism that is keeping you poor. This is the great paradox of American finance. We are a nation built on expansion, on the frontier spirit, on the idea of manifest destiny. Yet millions of us live our daily lives in a defensive crouch, terrified of the very tool we need to build our freedom. We have convinced ourselves that if we just skip enough lattes, if we just drive the sedan until the wheels fall off, if we just deny ourselves enough joy today, we will somehow shrink our way into abundance tomorrow. But you cannot shrink your way to greatness. You cannot starve your way to strength. And you certainly cannot save your way to wealth if your strategy is built on the architecture of anxiety. To understand this, we must walk a mile in the worn-out shoes of a man named Elias. Elias lived in a suburb that sat on the edge of the Rust Belt, a place where the autumns were beautiful, but the winters were gray and unforgiving. Elias was, by all traditional metrics, a good man. He was the kind of responsible citizen who paid his bills 3 days before they were due. He was a mid-level manager at a logistics firm, a job that didn't ignite his soul but kept the lights on. Elias viewed the world as a hostile entity, a place where money was constantly trying to escape him. His life was a fortress of frugality. Every Sunday morning, while his neighbors were sleeping in or heading to church, Elias sat at his kitchen table under the harsh hum of a fluorescent light, surrounded by receipts. He tracked everything. If the price of eggs went up by 30 cents at the local grocery store, Elias knew. He would drive 3 miles out of his way to save 4 cents on a gallon of gas, not realizing that the time and wear on his vehicle cost him far more than the pennies he retrieved. He called this discipline. He called this being responsible. But if you looked closely at Elias's face, you wouldn't see the calm satisfaction of a man in control. You would see the jagged lines of stress. He lived in a state of perpetual contraction. When his friends invited him out for dinner, he would scan the menu not for what he wanted to eat, but for the cheapest item that would sustain biological function. He drank water, not because he wasn't thirsty for wine, but because the markup offended his sensibilities. He was building a wall of savings, brick by painful brick, believing that if the wall got high enough, the world couldn't hurt him. But the tragedy of Elias was that while he was guarding the front gate with a shotgun, the enemy was tunneling underneath the floorboards. The enemy was inflation. The enemy was stagnation. The enemy was the opportunity cost of a life lived in fear. Elias was so busy defending his pile of sand that he never noticed the tide coming in. His strategy was based on a fundamental misunderstanding of physics. He believed money was a solid object, a finite resource like a pie where if someone else took a slice, there was less for him. He didn't understand that money is a current. It is liquid, it is energy, and like water, it must flow to generate power. By damming it up, by stopping the flow, he was creating a stagnant pond. And things that stagnate eventually rot. The rot in Elias's life wasn't metaphoric. It became literal. He had delayed repairing the roof of his modest home for 3 years. Every time he looked at the estimate from the contractor, his stomach churned. $5,000. That was $5,000 he had painstakingly scraped together over 20 months of skipped lunches and denied pleasures. He couldn't bear to part with it. So he bought a tarp. He bought sealant. He climbed up the ladder himself, risking his neck to save the labor cost, applying a patch to a wound that required surgery. Then came the storm of the decade. It wasn't just rain, it was a deluge that felt personal. The wind didn't just blow, it howled with the rage of neglected things. In the middle of the night, the sound of tearing shingles was followed by the sickening drip, drip, drip that turned into a gush. The water didn't just ruin the attic, it soaked through the insulation, destroyed the drywall in the master bedroom, and warped the hardwood floors he had been so careful not to scratch. When the sun rose over a soggy world the next morning, Elias stood in his living room, surrounded by buckets, looking at a disaster that would cost $20,000 to fix. His $5,000 of savings was a joke. His defensive strategy had failed. He had tried to save money on the roof, and in doing so, he had lost the house. He sat on his wet sofa, head in his hands, and for the first time, he realized that his math was wrong. He had spent 10 years playing defense, and he had just lost the game. It was in this wreckage that the window of revelation opened. It came in the form of a pickup truck pulling into his driveway. The truck belonged to Julian. Julian was a mystery to the neighborhood. He was an older man, perhaps in his late 60s, with hands that looked like leather and eyes that crinkled permanently at the corners. He didn't have a corporate job. He didn't wear suits. He spent his days tending to a sprawling orchard on the edge of town and restoring vintage motorcycles in his garage. He drove an old truck, but it purred like a jungle cat. His house wasn't a fortress. It was an open door, always hosting dinners, always smelling of roasted garlic and rosemary. Julian walked into Elias's living room, avoiding the puddles, and didn't offer the usual platitudes. He didn't say, "It will be okay." He looked at the ceiling, then he looked at Elias. "You're trying to hold back the ocean with a teaspoon, son," Julian said. His voice was gravel and honey. "I tried to be smart," Elias stammered, his voice cracking. "I saved every penny. I did the repairs myself. I don't understand." "That's exactly the problem," Julian said, leaning against the doorframe. "You are obsessed with retention. You think wealth is a container. It's not. Wealth is a river. You built a dam, Elias. And nature hates a dam. The pressure always builds until it breaks." Julian gestured to the window, to the sun breaking through the storm clouds. "Come with me. I want to show you something." Reluctantly, Elias climbed into Julian's truck. They drove out of the suburbs, past the strip malls and the gas stations, out to Julian's orchard. The storm had hit here too. Branches were down. Some fruit lay on the wet grass. But the trees were standing. And more importantly, the irrigation ditches that Julian had dug years ago were full, channeling the floodwaters into a massive reservoir at the bottom of the hill. "Look at that," Julian pointed. "The same rain that destroyed your house is watering my future harvest. You see the water as a threat. I see it as a resource. It's all about how you built your system." Julian turned to Elias, his expression serious. "You operate from a mindset of scarcity. In scarcity, every dollar spent is a dollar lost. It is a zero-sum game. You think if you spend $5 on a coffee, you are $5 poorer. But there is another way. The mindset of the steward, the investor. To an investor, a dollar isn't something to keep. It's an employee. It's a seed. If I spend $5 on a coffee, but that coffee gives me the energy and the environment to close a deal worth $500, that wasn't an expense. That was an investment with a 10,000% return. "But I don't close deals," Elias protested. "I manage logistics. I have a salary. It's fixed. And that is the cage you built for yourself," Julian countered. "You decided your income was a fixed number, so your only variable was your spending. You can only cut your spending to zero, Elias. You can't starve yourself to death and call it profit. But your income, your upside, that is infinite. You are sabotaging yourself because you are focusing all your brilliant mental energy on the wrong side of the equation. You are spending 10 hours of worry to save $10, when you could be spending 10 hours of creativity to make 10,000. That conversation was the seed. It didn't bloom overnight. It sat in the dark soil of Elias's mind for weeks as he dealt with the insurance adjusters and the contractors. But something had shifted. He began to look at his spreadsheet and realized it was a record of his fear, not his future. The rebellion of small steps began on a Tuesday. Elias was walking through a hardware store, looking for cheap paint to cover the water stains. His hand hovered over the bargain bin, the generic brand that was thin as water and would require 4 coats. Then, he heard Julian's voice. "Time is an asset. Don't light it on fire to save a nickel." Elias moved his hand. He grabbed the premium primer. It cost 3 times as much. His heart hammered in his chest, a physiological reaction to spending money. But he bought it. And when he painted the wall, it covered in 1 coat. He finished the job in 2 hours instead of the usual 6. He had 4 hours of his Saturday left. For the first time in years, he didn't use those 4 hours to clip coupons. He went to his garage. Elias had always loved wood. He loved the smell of sawdust, the feel of grain under his fingertips. But he had never pursued it because wood was expensive, and tools were expensive, and hobbies don't pay the bills. He looked at a pile of scrap wood from the roof repair, old, water-damaged beams of white oak. Trash, by his old definition. Raw material, by his new one. He took his circular saw, an old, wobbly thing that was dangerous to use, and tried to cut a plank. The cut was jagged. The tool was fighting him. In the past, Elias would have fought the tool for hours, cursing his lack of skill. Today he stopped. He drove back to the hardware store. He stood in the aisle looking at a high-quality table saw. It cost $600. He felt nauseous. That was 2 weeks of groceries. That was the electric bill for 3 months. The voice of his mother whispered in his ear, "That's too much. You can't afford it." But he asked himself a new question, a question Julian had planted. What is the cost of not buying this? The cost was his time. The cost was the quality of his work. The cost was remaining an amateur. He swiped his card. He didn't die. The sky didn't fall. He brought the saw home. It cut through the oak like butter. The precision was intoxicating. That weekend, he turned the ruined beams into a farmhouse dining table. It was rough, rustic, and beautiful. He sanded it until it felt like silk. He sealed it with oil. He took a picture and posted it on a local community forum, mostly to show Julian. "Made this from the storm wreckage," he wrote. Within an hour, he had a message. A woman from the next town over. "Is this for sale? I've been looking for a table exactly like this. I'll give you $800. Elias stared at the screen. $800. The saw had cost $600. He had made the table in a weekend. He had paid for the tool and made a $200 profit, and he still owned the tool. The tool could make 10 more tables. The math exploded in his head. In his old life, saving $200 would have taken him a month of painful deprivation. In this new life, he had generated $200 and a permanent asset in 2 days of joy. This was the scaling and the shift. It wasn't just about money. It was about the reclamation of agency. Elias realized that for decades, he had been selling his time wholesale to his employer and trying to buy his freedom retail at the grocery store. It was a losing trade. He began to reinvest. He didn't put the $800 into his savings account to make up for the roof. He bought more wood. He bought a better sander. He bought a course on joinery. He stopped looking at these things as expenses. They were fuel. His weekends transformed. He wasn't the tired man slumped on the couch, dreading Monday. He was the creator in the garage, covered in dust, listening to jazz, building things that had value. His anxiety began to recede, replaced by a strange, humming energy. He walked differently at his day job. He wasn't as terrified of being fired because he knew he had another way to feed himself. And paradoxically, because he was less desperate, he became better at his job. He stopped hoarding information and started mentoring his junior staff. He stopped hiding problems and started proposing solutions. His boss noticed. A promotion followed, not because he asked for it, but because he was acting like an owner, not a servant. 6 months later, Elias stood in Julian's orchard again. The trees were heavy with apples. Elias had a check in his pocket, profit from a custom commission of furniture for a local cafe. It was enough to finally fix the roof properly, with high-grade architectural shingles that would last 50 years. "I think I understand the river now," Elias said, picking an apple and polishing it on his sleeve. Julian nodded, watching the sun dip below the horizon. "You stopped building a wall, Elias. You started planting an orchard." "It's scary," Elias admitted. "Every time I buy a new tool or hire the kid next door to help me sand, I feel that old panic. The fear that the money won't come back. That fear is the ghost of your old self," Julian said. "It will never fully go away. But you have to understand the philosophy of security." Julian walked over to a young sapling and touched a leaf. "There are 3 pillars to this, Elias, and they go against everything we are taught in school. First," Julian said, holding up a finger, production over preservation. "True security does not come from what you have hoarded. It comes from your ability to produce value. If you lost all your money today, Elias, but you kept your skills, your tools, and your reputation, you would be wealthy again in a year. The man who has $1 million but no skills is one market crash away from poverty. The man with skills and no money is just temporarily broke." Second, he continued, assets over currency. You spent your life worshiping the dollar bill, but the dollar is weak. It loses value every day the government prints more. You need to trade that dying currency for living assets. Your tools are assets. Your knowledge is an asset. This orchard is an asset. A business, a rental property, a patent. These are things that grow. Currency shrinks. Assets expand. You were saving ice cubes in a desert. Now you are building a freezer. And third, Julian smiled, flow over stagnation. Generosity is a competitive advantage. When you hired that kid to help you sand, you put money in his pocket. He told his parents. His parents hired you to build a bookshelf. Money must move. When you clutch it too tight, you strangle it. When you circulate it with intention, it returns to you multiplied. Elias looked at his hands. They were calloused now. They were stronger. He realized that the safety he had chased for 20 years was a mirage. The only true safety was his own competence and his willingness to engage with the world rather than hide from it. He drove home that evening, passing the grocery store where he used to agonize over the price of milk. He didn't even look at the sign. He went home, kissed his wife, who had noticed the light return to his eyes, and went to his garage. He turned on the lights. He looked at the stack of walnut wood waiting for him. It wasn't a pile of bills. It was a pile of potential. So, here is the truth that Elias found. The truth that is waiting for you on the other side of your fear. You are sabotaging yourself because you are playing a game of defense in a world designed for offense. You are trying to cut your way to growth, and it is bleeding you dry. The latte factor is a lie designed to keep you small. It keeps you focused on the trivial so you never look at the monumental. While you are worrying about the $4 for coffee, you are ignoring the $40,000 of missed income potential because you are too tired, too uninspired, and too scared to invest in yourself. You have to stop viewing your life as a budget to be trimmed and start viewing it as a business to be built. A business invests in research and development. That's your education. A business invests in equipment. That's your tools and your environment. A business invests in marketing. That's your network and your relationships. When you deny yourself the high-quality food that gives you energy, you are sabotaging your engine. When you deny yourself the trip to the conference because the flight is expensive, you are sabotaging your network. When you refuse to outsource the lawn care because you can do it for free, you are burning your most precious non-renewable resource, time, to save a renewable resource, money. It requires a terrifying leap of faith. It requires you to look at your bank account and see it not as a scorecard of your worth, but as a fuel tank for your journey. You cannot drive across the country if you are afraid to put gas in the car. Start small. Find the one area in your life where you are pinching pennies and paying in pain. Maybe it's your mattress. Maybe it's your computer. Maybe it's a skill you've wanted to learn. Spend the money. Buy the quality. Invest in the upgrade. And then use the energy, the time, and the joy that purchase gives you to produce something of value for the world. Stop building the wall. The wall will not save you. The flood is coming, and the wall will crumble. Stop building the wall and start digging the channels. Start planting the seeds. Start trusting in your own capacity to grow, to create, and to generate. The world does not need more misers. It does not need more people shrinking into the shadows, clutching their wallets. The world needs you. It needs your skills, your passion, your daring. It needs you to be fully alive, fully resourced, and fully engaged. So, tomorrow morning, buy the coffee. But drink it with a pen in your hand, designing the blueprint of an empire, not a bunker. Stop saving your life and start living it. Stop surviving and start scaling. The door is open. The tools are in your hands. The sabotage ends today.